What is going on, everybody? Star Wars Dad back for another video. Today we're going to be doing 15 different budget decks or budget lists to kind of help people that are new to the game, or maybe you're trying to get a friend into the game, or just maybe the game is expensive and you're just trying to play a deck that's fun or somewhat competitive for a reasonable price. But before we get started with today's video, please make sure to join my Patreon as a free member if you can't join as a paid member. We have a lot of great stuff on there. Do new deck lists every day, giveaways, and more. And please make sure to like and subscribe as it helps the channel to grow. I greatly appreciate it. So the first deck on the list is this Kylo Red list. It's clocking in at $27, so very reasonable. The big cut from the normal version of this deck to make it a budget is the Kylo's Tie Silencer, which is like $20 a pop. So like an additional $60 you'd have to pay. But I mean, this deck, I mean, you're changing that out for Mercenary Gunship, which is a 3/2 as well. So yeah, you don't get the cool synergy of discarding it with Kylo, the leader, and getting it back from your discard pile. But like, I don't think that's necessarily makes or breaks anything. I think this is actually a very competitive list, and it recently this deck just finished second at a PQ of like 100 people, I think. So it's a very cheap way to get into the game, super aggressive list, and can be very competitive. And Kylo's just a fun leader. I mean, if you haven't played Kylo before, or if you're new to the game, this is a good one just to kind of get a feel for how the deck works. I think aggro is the easiest way to start a new game. All right, the next one on the list, clocking in at $31, so very reasonable as well, is Krennic ECL. So the big cuts from this list are going to be Darth Vader and Snoke, as I think Darth Vader's like $35 each, so three of those is running you like $105. The Snokes I think are about 20, so if you're playing two of those, it's 2 to 3, so $40 to $60 or more. So you're saving like $150 here. Avenger is another one that's like, I think I want to say like 15 if you're running a couple of those, so another $30. But I think this deck is still fairly competitive. You're also cutting Vigilance, which is another one. I think that's like $30 a pop, and you're replacing that with Cargo Juggernaut, which actually I think is in a lot of cases Cargo Juggernaut is just better than Vigilance in this list because you can ECL it in. You're still gaining 4 life, and it becomes, you can, depending on what you attack into, you can actually bump up its stats and make it have 5 power, which is very relevant in the Krennic list. I'd say the biggest loss from the normal deck list is going to be Snoke and Avenger. I mean, Vader's very good too, but I think this list can still be very competitive because you're playing more aggressively with Krennic. So again, you just want to be low to the ground. Those cards you're playing more the long game. You could still, you still have Relentless and Palpatine's Return in here. You still have Traitorous in here. Still have lots of good things. I think you could argue, I think I meant to do this, is put 1 copy of Relentless in the main board and maybe cut 1 Reinforcement Walker and find a way to get 1 Palpatine's Return in there as well. But just another fun one. Krennic is a competitive list. We've seen it have a lot of success recently. And I think this is just a fun way to get a feel for this deck and to be somewhat competitive. And like I said, this is more of an aggro deck anyways for the in a lot of matchups. So you just want to be lower to the ground. You're using things like Gideon, Steadfast Battalion on your 5 resource turn. When Krennic flips, Steadfast Battalion becomes a 7/7. So, and Gideon of course pumps up all your units, and Gideon's incredibly good in Krennic because once it's damaged, it very easily can boost its own experience and become a 7 powered unit. So super fun, cheap way to play Krennic. I think Krennic could do pretty well in a budget version. Another aggro deck here, Asajj Red at $32. I think the biggest cuts here were, again, I think the Kylo's Tie Silencer and then maybe a Hotshot Blaster. But again, Mercenary Gunship still a 3/2. You don't necessarily need the Hotshot Blaster. You can just use Breaking In because you want to use events anyways, and Hotshot Blaster is not an event. So I really think you're only losing the Kylo's Tie Silencer, but again, It's not much different than the mercenary gunship. The minor synergy there is the benthic attacking with red units, but I still think that this is a really good way to just run people over very quickly. Asajj has first strike when it comes out. You get that +1/0 if you use an event. So super easy way to get into the game and just kind of run people over with another aggressive list, very cheap at $32. So the goal that I had for this video was to try to keep all my lists under $60, and you'll kind of see as we get the prices go up, because I'm doing it from cheapest to the most expensive, kind of where I go with things, and it gets a little less aggressive. The next one is Luke Blue. So of course the biggest loss here is taking out Luke Skywalker. I think the replacements are like more removal and putting in the Luminara, which is not bad. It's not like a bad card. I mean, it has grit, which can boost its power up pretty easily. I think overall the deck doesn't change that much. I mean, Luke is definitely nice, but you don't need Luke to win. A lot of the games I win with this deck are not because of Luke. I mean, sure, it's a great card, and sure, I want to find it, absolutely, but I think you could still be fairly competitive here. I mean, shields are really, really good right now with all the pinging, so this is $43 is a very cheap way to be competitive, have fun playing this game. And the way I look at it, if you're playing on a budget, is like play a deck a lot, and if you feel like, you know what, I'm ready to buy the Lukes, then buy the Lukes. I think they're like around same thing as Darth Vader, like 35, 40 bucks each. Buy them one at a time and start inserting them, taking the place of the more, the Luminaras and other things. But this is a great budget deck. It's very competitive. There wasn't really many changes I made to this list from the original list, just minus the Lukes, I think, were the biggest thing. So a very easy way to be competitive. And just, I think I substituted in more removal. I put a couple making openings in the main board. And like I said, the Luminara, I might have added one more Chewie in the main. And I added more Sentinels. So it feels good, though. All right, next on the list is Boba Yellow. I think the really only change here was taking out Millennium Falcon, which are like $30 a piece. So otherwise, this is the exact same deck. And that's a lot of the hero decks. You've taken out Falcon, because Falcon is still overpriced. And you definitely don't need Falcon to win with this deck. Like, this deck thrives off of ambush and overpowering your opponents, and just taking things out, one-shotting everything, one-shotting their leaders with things like Plo Koon and Han, and using your Sentinels as well. And then your end games like U-Wing, Han, and Han1, and even Reinforcement Walker, which are all fairly reasonable cards. The two Han1s I think are the most expensive cards in here. So this is one of those decks that's underrated. Again, you're not really changing much here from the original list. I don't think you need the Falcon to win. I think I just put in 3 Mercenary Gunship. Again, it's a very good replacement for a lot of these expensive spaceships. It's a 3/2 on turn 1. I mean, sure, your opponent can steal it, but most of the time that's not a good play, and you could always steal it right back. And you want to get to your 7/8 resource turn, so if they're doing things like that anyways, then that's your advantage in this deck. So I think this is one of those underrated decks. It does well into a lot of things. That +1 you get from the keyword ability from your ambush effects, it really does. The math starts to math really well. It's really easy to kill a lot of leaders. Like Mighty Cohort kills Sabine, Plo Koon kills Jango, it kills Quinlan. I mean, I did a video on Plo Koon, I think on Quinlan Tarkintown, but Plo Koon kills so many leaders on 5 resources. And not to mention in here, it kills even more as long as you have Coordinate, because then you're hitting for 7. So, very, very strong. So, another fun one. Good one to get your friend into to play this game. All right, Mace. So now we're getting into more of starting to get into the more expensive lists. And again, these are at $50. So again, we're cutting Luke Skywalker in all these because we have to. We had to cut 1 K2SO, I think, because they're like $6 a pop. And I don't think we're playing Red 3 in here. But that's another card you have to cut sometimes. But yeah, I mean, again, we're just subbing in Luminara for Luke. We're adding in more removal in the main. So we added in a Vanquish, I think. And then I'm trying to think what else I put in here to substitute for Luke. I think it was just the 2 Luminara and the 1 Vanquish. It's a super, I think Mace Blue just won a PQ. Otherwise, it's the same list. Again, losing Luke stinks, but I still think this is a very competitive deck. You also lost Vigilance in the sideboard, but again, Cargo Juggernaut does a very similar thing. It doesn't remove things, doesn't mill. Of course, you're losing those aspects of Vigilance, which are, Vigilance is one of the best cards in the game. But Cargo Juggernaut gets a body on the field and gains you 4 life. And I think most of the time in this particular deck, you're using it to gain life. So another good one, a cheap way to play Mace and play a hero deck in blue. Okay, Jango Red. This is like basically the exact same deck. I think the only change was the Kylo's TIE Silencer and maybe the Hotshot Blaster. But I like the breaking in anyways, and I don't even necessarily think you need the Hotshot Blaster. It's nice to pull it out of your resources, I think, is the main reason. It's just like it's an easy resource and you can pull it out when you need it versus having to use it from your hand, and it could potentially be a dead card sometimes. But otherwise, this is the exact same deck as the Jango Red. So this, if you're trying to like really play a competitive list for $50 to get into this game, like Jango is such a fun deck. It's one of the best decks in the game, and you're really not changing much from that list at all. Like it's basically the same thing. I mean, I guess the biggest change is the Hotshot Blaster, but that's very situational. I think this is just the closest deck as far as budget decks go to being the exact same as the deck that wins tournaments compared to some of these other lists. So this is, I mean, if you're trying to get into this game and play a competitive list, or maybe you just can't afford the Kylo's TIE Silencers, like this is a great one to just play and be competitive for a reasonable price. I mean, $50 for a competitive deck in a new game is a very good price. Like a lot of the decks in this game are $400 to $500, so $50 is great. Okay, another one. So Han1 Yellow is arguably the best deck right now. Has been for a decent while. The biggest change again is just taking out the Millennium Falcons here and the Cunning. Now Cunning is a big loss, absolutely. I mean, that card's broken. It's kind of like Vigilance in a lot of these decks, but in this particular version, I saw this version pop up, I think a week ago. It was the Rebel version. So all we did here, we took out the Cunnings and the Falcons. We put in the Alliance X-Wing, which is a good wing leader target. And for the Cunnings, we added in a Cantina Bouncer, a 3rd copy, and the 2 Change of Heart to kind of balance that out. And Change of Heart's kind of like one of your top end plays where you can just claim the initiative, steal your opponent's unit, and attack them with their own unit as a way to be aggressive and close the game out. So yeah, losing Cunning stinks. It does make a difference, but if you want to get I think the reason you would get the budget version of this deck is if you didn't want to pay for the Falcons or didn't have them, but you wanted to try this deck out and you really wanted to see how it feels and if it's something that fits your play style, and if you want to see if you want to invest in the Falcons and just still be competitive. I mean, this is still a powerful leader. You still have the DJ Tech combo, and that's the most powerful combo in the game right now. So for $51 or $50, whatever, this is a really, really cost-effective way to play another one of the best decks in the format. And obviously, if you're going to keep playing this deck, you definitely need to invest in the Cunnings. The Falcons, I say they're not as important as the Cunnings, but they're something if you're continuing to play this deck, you can slowly invest in those and start replacing them with the Alliance X-Wings. But the Cunning is the first card I would get if you're going to play this more seriously. But yeah, I mean, $50 to play this deck without that is, that's a very reasonable price. And again, you're getting a feel for this deck. This deck takes a lot of playtesting to get good with. So I think that's worth it if you want to play one of the best decks in the game and then just kind of work your way towards the Cunning, or just kind of jump into this game if you haven't played it before and not spend too much money to see if you like it, or before you invest in the more expensive cards. This is a good starting point. And the Rebel synergy is a lot of fun. It works really well in here at being super aggressive. Again, I think you're not playing the Hotshot Blaster, but I don't even think he played Hotshot Blaster in his particular list. So another good one. Okay, Sabine, and this is another good one too. I mean, you're about $50. You're losing Poe Dameron, but I don't think. I mean, Sabine is one of the lower skill level decks that's very highly competitive. So yes, losing Poe, it does stink. Poe's great, but for a budget version of this deck, I still think this deck is incredibly strong. Like General Dodonna does a different thing than what Poe does for a cheaper cost, and if you're able to go wide early, like General Dodonna can be really overwhelming for your opponent, just pumping up all your rebels. You do cut one K2SO and one Red 3 to make this deck cost effective. You still get to play a couple Wreckers at the top end, which is great, and that's still one of the best cards in the deck. You're going back to the Steadfast Battalion, which is early on in the first set before we got Poe. That was one of the go-to cards to overpower your opponent. You could also use the Guerrilla Attack Pod in that slot, but I chose to just put the 3 Steadfast as a good ECL target if I have Sabine out there. Again, you're also losing Darksaber. So, I mean, Darksaber is very good, but I've seen a lot of lists not play Darksaber at all just because of where things are with the pinging and exhausting and removal. And that, a lot of times your opponent is waiting for you to put the Darksaber on so they can just remove Sabine. So, I don't think you need it. I've seen a lot of versions be successful with General Dodonna in the past. So, another one, if you want to play one of these last 3 decks that I just did, like for $50, that's a really good entry price to play one of the best decks in the game. And again, if you're become a serious Sabine player, then you can slowly invest in those cards and start piecing them in and taking out your Dodonnas and your Steadfast Battalion for your Poes and your Darksabers if you start to want to add in those cards, which are basically those are the 2 slots, right? Like Steadfast replaced Poe and General Dodonna replaced Darksaber. But like I said, in a lot of cases, Dodonna is really, really good. Just being able to pump up all your units and give them +1/+1. You could also play the Colonel Yularen that I did not put in this list, which is another cheap way to pump up your units early on and have a little bit of restore in the main board. So another card you could put in here. But yeah, I mean, this is very, very similar to the original deck. It's a very, very good entry point to play one of the best decks in the game. All right, Qi'ra, so now we're kind of getting into the less aggressive decks and trying to see if we can make them work. I think this is a good price point if you want to play Qi'ra and just kind of get a feel for it and see if you want to invest in the Darth Vaders, the Vigilance, the Snokes, and the Avengers, which is going to add on what Vigilance is like 30 each. That's like 90. Vaders like 105, so that's 195. Add in 2 Snokes, that's about another 40, so 235. Add in the Avengers, that's like 30, so 275. So if you're gonna add another $275 over time, this is a good list to just start off and see if this is the list for you and if you really want to play Qi'ra. I love Qi'ra. Qi'ra is one of my favorite lists to play. So, this, I'd say if I didn't have any of those cards, this is where I would start and kind of work my way up. Again, Cargo Juggernaut's replacing Vigilance. I think we put Relentless in the main. I added in more copies of Devastating Gunship, or 1 more copy, I think. And then I put in the Steadfast Battalion, because Steadfast Battalion, again, is really good in here. Because with Qi'ra flips on 5, so Steadfast is a 7/7. It's still a very strong card. Just hasn't been played as much in the last couple months because other cards have replaced it. But I still think Steadfast is really good in here. Because Qi'ra can definitely be the aggressor in some matchups. Otherwise, it's still a strong list. It's still going to give decks a run for their money. It's still doing a lot of the same things that it wants to do, even without those really powerful cards at the top end. So I still think this is a really good starting point just to play a list without those expensive cards to get into the game. For those of you that are, maybe you played in set 1 and you're coming back in set 3, and maybe you took a break from the game and you haven't got the legendaries. I know one person I talked to who was talking about wanting to play Qi'ra. This is a good starting point until you work your way up to getting those cards again. And it's just a super, super fun leader. Okay, Yoda Blue. So now we're, kind of, again, taking out the Luke Skywalkers and the Vigilance. Obviously, Vigilance is much stronger in here than it is in other decks that I've mentioned, because it's only 4 cost in here, and it's just at 4 cost it's just incredibly effective. But I still think, you know, what you're trying to do in this version here is just play a lot of Sentinels to slow things down so you get to your bigger payoffs. So you're using Village Protectors. Suji is really amazing in here, and then Rey, Suji, and your upgrades have really good synergy, because Rey puts a shield on one of your opponents if you want to make Suji a Sentinel. You can also heal your own Sentinels. And then you have Obi-Wan and Bendu as Sentinels. So a lot of Sentinels are in here anyways. So Luke, it's not like Luke was absolutely necessary. I think, again, I added in more removal to make up for Luke being gone. I also added in the Reys, which were not in the original list. And then the 2 Luminara, again, to take the Luke as another way to heal. This is a cost-effective way to get into a Yoda deck that's very competitive and works well. It's similar to the Luke Blue list, but a little different because Yoda's abilities are different. You're not getting the shields, but Yoda can be such a game swinger when it comes out on its flip turn. So another fun one. All right, next on the list, Quinlan Tarkintown, one of the best decks in the game. Again, we're just taking out the Falcons here is the biggest change. Otherwise, I'm trying to think if there's anything out. Maybe Hotshot Blaster. Those are the 2 cards that I took out. I added in a couple breaking in for the Hotshot Blaster. For the Falcon, I guess it was the Anakin's Interceptor, which I'm totally fine with. Yeah, I think that was the change. I'm trying to remember. I did all 15 of these different decks simultaneously. So, but yeah, I mean, super competitive way to play this deck. I mean, this deck is not necessarily relying on the Falcon. A lot of times Falcon is actually awkward because you want to do other things and that you don't want to pay the tax. I mean, obviously it's, Falcon does its thing where it comes in and can kill a thing, or comes in and can close out the game, which that's what you pay $30 a pop for. But otherwise, this deck is very, very good. It doesn't need Falcon to win, that's for sure. So otherwise it's the same. So it's another one that's just like very, very close and super competitive. And this is just one of my favorite decks to play. I love the thought processes and the thinking and the strategy behind this deck. I love the discard options, and you're not losing any of that stuff because you're getting that, from Force Throw and the Force Synergy and, and Pillage. So another one, like if you want to play one of the more competitive decks but you just don't have the Falcons, this is a great starting point for this list and playing Quinlan. Next on the list is Ahsoka Green. Again, we're just cutting the pose. This is like if you don't want to play Sabine, but you want to play a cheap aggro deck. This is another one that's super fun, and I think it's very competitive. I don't think you even need Poe anyways in the regular version, and we're just again we're replacing Poe with Steadfast Battalion here. Otherwise, it's the exact same deck. We're not really losing anything else. Maybe I think I dropped one K2SO and 1 Red 3 perhaps, just to get under that $60. But otherwise, this deck is super streamlined. You're just playing a lot of cheap units. You're playing Spec Force, Clone Deserter, Soldier to activate your Coordinate, getting that +1 when you attack in. You're flipping Ahsoka on 5, so Steadfast comes right in as a 7/7 with ECL, which is incredibly strong still. So I don't think you're really losing much here. It's another one if you just want to play the different leader. I do think Ahsoka is one of those ones that as we get better and better 1 and 2 drops, as we get more cards in the game, that Ahsoka is going to be one of those leaders you might want to pay more attention to. So this is just a super fun way of playing that deck for a very reasonable price. Or maybe you want to get your buddy in. Another thing is, like, maybe you have most of these cards and you want to get one of your friends to play. This is like a great way to make them a competitive deck, and just I have all the cards already. You can have all these or play with these, and just make like a super competitive list for them. So that's without having to buy the expensive cards. All right, Han Blue. So of course, this is kind of, again, we're taking out the Lukes. Honestly, this is the one where Luminara makes the most sense because it has grit. So when you're cheating it out at 6 resources with Han, you're making it a 6/7 already, which is fine. The Coordinate is activated, you know, or the grid is activated if you have coordinate, which is very easy to do in this deck. But this is one that doesn't feel that much different either. Again, I think we're taking out vigilance, but I added in making openings in the main to give us a little more life gain. I think I added in a vanquish too, so you're playing a little more, little closer to soft control with this list because you're playing a little more removal. But that's the way I originally played this deck, and it worked for me. I also added in Anakin's, I think, to take place of Poe, because I think Poe, is a card you oftentimes want to play in here. But I also added in the Senatorial Corvettes, which is a very, very good card that continues the theme of discarding cards when it dies. So you're really, really messing up your opponent's hand with Force Throw, your 2 K2SOs, your 3 Senatorial Corvettes, and your Pillages in the sideboard. So another one that if you want to play this deck, just again, if you don't have the Lukes or something, it's very, very similar. And like I said, I think in this particular case, Luminara really is not, you're really not losing much. You're still gaining life. How many units you have on board, I'd say typically 3 to 4 life you might gain when you play it, which is different than Luke. In some cases in this deck, you really need to gain the life. So I think I added the 3rd copy of Make an Opening. We already have the 3 top target in here. We already have Kanan in here and Yoda. So, and then 2 redemptions in the main just to make sure. And I think that was the other change. Yeah, I have 3 redemptions in this list because, losing to aggro can be one of your biggest issues. So making sure you have the ability to kind of get back in it. I totally think that this list would be still very competitive. Yeah, I mean, you're going to miss Luke. Everybody's going to miss Luke in a budget deck. But again, this is a really very similar to the same, to that deck. All right, Rey Tarkintown. I think this is actually the most expensive deck on the list, and I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, we take out the Lukes again, so very similar to the Han Blue deck that we just looked at. We're not playing as many top-end things in this particular version because we can't cheat things out like we can in Han. We're playing the R2 to cycle things. I'm trying to think what is different. Maybe a little more removal main board? Maybe? Doesn't feel like there's too many differences there. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the list we just looked at. Oh, the biggest difference is we have Daring Raid in the main because we're playing Tarkintown on this list. And we're playing Cargo Juggernaut in place of the Vigilance. And just one extra redemption on the side because we can't cheat it out as easily as we can in Han2 Blue. So just, again, if you want to play Rey Tarkintown at a budget cost under, $60 or less without the Lukes. Again, we're using the Anakins in place of the Poe. Still a 6/6, and drawing cards is good in a deck like this where we want to be, again, more of a soft control deck. And there is a little more removal in here because of the Daring Raids. So, yeah, I hope you guys found that helpful. All the deck lists will be below in the video description. And definitely, I think this was a suggestion from someone in the comments for, a video on budget decks. So any other suggestions are great, because I will definitely consider them, and this is one that was suggested just a few days ago, and I thought it was a really good idea, and I hadn't seen anything like this. So, but just kind of wanted to do something to help out those that are maybe new to the game, or maybe you want your friend to play, or maybe you can't afford some of these crazy expensive cards still. Hopefully the prices will drop soon, because it is kind of ridiculous. Some of these cards are still $30 a piece. But hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, y'all have a good one, and